right. Well, I think you can also do recording outside of that if we really needed to. Okay, anyway, we're live. So great. So hey, thanks all for coming. It's I need to stop watching myself on the live stream. There we go. It's December 23rd, almost the end of the year. This is our last Meshery build and release meeting of 2021. And I think it's going to be a good one. We've got a few items lined up on the agenda and a number of you on the call. If you haven't dropped your name into the meeting minutes just yet, please take a moment to do so. Also, if you have agenda items that you don't see on here, please drop it in as well. As a quick preview, so Mario's been getting an environment set up, working on building out more Cypress tests. We'll take a look at his environment, make sure that he's good to go. Nivendu, you've been working on making sure that we've got end-to-end, well, whatever end-to-end means, but like we generally all agree. I just call that out as something we need to go. It would be helpful for all of us to go write down what the terms are. But you're going to talk about the test plan, what coverage we've got, what ongoing workflows are being written, and opportunity for Vishal and Aditya and others on the call to jump in and help out. We should also do a quick coverage of the new, well, I'll call it integration test for now, new compatibility matrix dashboard and how that plays into this. Anybody have any other items to add to the agenda? Cool. All right. Well, with that, Mario, you're up first. Should we do some live troubleshooting?
Yep, sounds good. Just a sec. Okay, so having some issues with this accessing Meshery. So I followed the steps that we talked about. Let me just show Meshery CTL system status. I don't know why it takes some time, but should be here soon. And meanwhile, just try accessing this. Okay, this is just okay. It's better. I don't know why it's taking so long, but anyways, so I was trying to see what's the problem, but the services seem to be running. But again, so Navedu suggested I use this port, but this is the internal one, right?
I get confused between which one's external and internal.
Yeah, me too, but I don't know. Is there a way we can figure out?
Yeah,
I tried with both and they're failing, so they just time out. So I'm thinking that it's related to the fact that there's this platform issue. It says that Docker doesn't expose Docker network to the host. So containers would only be reachable from the host via port forward. Is that what this guide is helping us do? Or is this just letting us know that this would not work on Mac and nor Windows? Just kind of confused there.
Yeah, no, totally. The guide below is providing, it's not, that is not providing port forwarding as much as it's providing a different type of load balancer, which basically it has the same effect. It's another solution. And so.
Yeah, because here it's suggesting using ingress. So it's kind of giving me the impression that this wouldn't work for those systems. Otherwise, why would they suggest it, right? They would say either follow below guide or follow this other guide. So
Yeah. And either will work. Actually, I'm unfamiliar with Metal LB. It might be that
yeah.
Metal LB itself is just doing port forwarding. Like in an essence,
Uh-huh.
like the same thing is happening with an ingress. Like it's just doing port forwarding. The difference being so there's like, here's the nice thing is there's like 12 different ways to solve this. But the confusing thing is like, okay, well, so which one should we? So
Yeah.
just
So I
before we
think
do,
that the external IP, I mean, sorry for interrupting, the load balancer seems to be accessible in the Docker network, but it's not being exposed to the host. But you're saying that doing like using MetalB would be something similar.
yeah.
But I don't know. I don't have any other explanation of why this wouldn't work if the port is there, you know?
Oh yeah.
Even if I try with the other one, same effect. It's just timing out.
Yeah, there's a diagram on this.
Mm.
I think it made its way into Meshery docs just because so many, so many users will hit this issue.
Exactly, yeah, and I think it's a great deterrent for like
Yeah,
newcomers, right? It's been a bit frustrating, so
totally.
maybe we could suggest I don't know, some other approach, at least for what I'm trying to do, which is Cypress scripting. I'm thinking maybe I could just, I now I have a cluster, maybe I could just do out of cluster deploy, and then try again, because I had some issues with Minikube, but maybe with Kind, it'd be easier, like to do that, like just run Meshery in Docker, and then just. But again, I don't think that we have like specific instructions for that over here, right?
We actually have too many instructions as part of the thing. Like we shouldn't be telling people how to deploy Kind. That's something they should go look somewhere else to do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, actually, the steps seem very simple. But you know what? These kind of instructions, yeah, they might find them on the documentation.
Yeah.
But at least for my part, it seemed very simple. Besides creating the cluster, I just followed the specific steps for Meshery CTL and just specified.
Yeah, that's actually the thing that we really need to optimize the docs for is having people use Meshery CTL and actually having people deploy in cluster as much as possible just to avoid the networking issue. So the
which is what I'm trying to do, but now there's access between, or there could be access between the cluster and Meshery. It's just that a host is totally not invited to this party, you know?
Yep. So let's recap your network setup. Like Meshery is running and is running well. That 172, both the private ranges, the 10 dot and the 172 dot, your user space on your machine doesn't know how to get to those. And so, yes, it very much does have to do with that note that you see on Metal LB where they're saying, look, those networks just aren't exposed to your host. And that's where you're sitting, you, Mario, as the user. So just to recap, by the way, so you're on a Windows machine. And
Mac.
Oh, Mac. Okay. So you're on Mac, Docker desktop. Okay. And then right now you're running Kind.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you do me a favor? Like since there's, like I said, there's more than 12, there's like 25 different ways to do this. Let's restart real quick and try this. If you go to your Docker desktop preferences.
Yep, they're over here. I'll bring them up.
And if
wrong button.
I'm assuming you don't necessarily have, like if you click on Kubernetes over there.
You did suggest, so maybe I should just enable this one. And
the reason being, well, there's a couple, I mean, like, hey, like there really are 25 ways. Like the other ways that you're doing it, they will work, but just to avoid, to get you up and going as quickly as possible. Yeah, it's the Docker, that note that you see on Metal LB, that's not true for Docker desktop. Docker desktop integrates
very well with this feature.
So it helps get some of those ports exposed to the host. And so, yeah. if you also stop kind
Sure.
and you're
I'll do that.
not running Minikube either, I assume.
No, no,
Okay.
not at the moment. Just kind. So I'll just stop it over here, or maybe from the, yep, this should be okay, right? Once this is done,
Oh yeah.
stopped. Now I'll stop it kind.
Yeah.
Should take some seconds.
And then it'll take a little while for when you check the box for
For that to
Kubernetes.
take effect. So I'll do that right now.
Okay.
What about this one?
It
Did I
just
show it? No.
For now, maybe not only
Nope.
that, like it's just
Okay.
about whether or not you see them in the list. And so, yeah.
Okay, it'll take some minutes. So maybe I could just stop sharing and we can proceed with the rest of them.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Topics. Sure. Thanks. I'll just stop sharing.
But like in your other environment, one of the quick ways to kind of solve that is to use kubectl and do a kubectl port forward.
Okay.
It is one way. So it's just a kubectl command. Another way is, and there's some of this in the instructions, like that metal LB instruction, it was saying, oh, you could use an ingress. And like, here's an example ingress that you can use to expose Meshery's service and Nginx one. Another one is what we were saying earlier is like, now I was saying, hey, to expose it as a node port, this might be an issue for you with the use of kind. I'm not sure, but yeah, but this is another approach as well. Some of the docs need to be cleaned up. Some of the docs, we just want to not necessarily direct people to use Helm or to use, like we generally want the flow for people who are deploying Meshery to be, hey, come here. Like this is, there's a lot of
fastest way to start, right?
Yeah, and it accounts for a lot of things. You know, it really tries to help. It tries to help overcome. For those that are like really, very well seasoned with Kubernetes, it's like, hey, there's no, or for the, they understand, they've had to suffer through this with something else. It's not a Meshery thing.
Sure.
For some, when they're using managed Kubernetes, sometimes it's, if it's running in a cloud, AKS or EKS or something like that, that some of that exposure is both easier and harder. Easier because the load balancer, that type of networking works very well with the cloud providers because they all support that. Although sometimes the people get hung up on the fact that they're trying to expose Meshery publicly, and so they need to, like, anyway, that
manage certificates and
public
domains. Yep.
All right, so good. Navendu, you're up.
Let me just share my screen. So I hope this is readable, right? Like it is pretty wide. So, okay. So I have been updating the Meshery test plan to better track how we are covering the automated tests. So just to give an update on that, like we are tracking both the integration tests as well as the end-to-end tests, how we define those tests in here. And basically, we also track the overall coverage. So all of these are automated. So if you change the values in these particular cells, these gets updated. So it's a view of how we are progressing with the test coverage. And yep, so for the end-to-end tests, I have been writing some for Meshery CTL, and I guess like Mario will be writing some with Cypress for the UI as well. So I have 17 test scenarios covered, and 10 are in progress, which are related to lifecycle management in Meshery. So we'll be testing some of those here. Yep. Uh, so yeah. So I also mentioned testing these on multiple environments. So multiple Kubernetes versions and multiple operating systems. So we can leverage GitHub's runners to run these tests parallelly on all these different systems. So we can also track that here as well.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem because of the cost of those runners. So we'll have to think about that. Can you get more specific about which end-to-end tests are covering what test cases?
Yep. So currently we only have the Meshery CTL end-to-end test, which I made a PR a couple of days ago. So these tests use Meshery CTL to basically it spins up a cluster, deploys Meshery, and runs some Meshery CTL commands. So these covers some of the areas in Meshery. The other end-to-end tests will be in the Meshery UI. So we are testing from the perspective of both the clients. So that should cover these test cases.
Is the intention for those two workflows to run in the same workflow?
No, I guess I think it. I don't know how it should be but maybe it should be separate because one tests the CLI, the other tests the UI, and it would be better or it would be more maintainable if they are separate.
Okay. They're both going to use the same. So there's some strategy that needs to be written down here, kind of thought about. That is that of the integration, the end-to-end test that you have right now, it looks like it builds Meshery CTL only fires when there's a change in Meshery CTL. And that makes, well, I guess you've got a couple of different ones. And maybe the one that you're showing here is that this one, this particular.
Yeah, this was basically scheduled to run.
Okay.
So we don't actually run it when PRs are made.
Good. Okay. So this particular test essentially becomes of this full regression is what it can be kind of built into, which is to say, hey, once a night or on some basis, build all the latest components, Meshery CTL, Meshery UI, Meshery server, Meshery adapter, all of them, Meshery operator, build them all, build mesh sync, build them all. and then it would go through and deploy a Kubernetes, deploy a, what do you call it? And then run Meshery and then take Meshery through using pattern files, take Meshery through a number of sequences of things. What the high level, the high level workflow that I'm describing there, that full regression test, to your point, if it's designed well, it would really just be an index of any number of other workflows that are one that's dedicated to just building Meshery CTL and then executing a number of Meshery CTL commands, that perform different integration tests and do different things. And that, as you assert what that test is, whether or not a given individual test was successful, we would want to have commonality across whether or not the terms that we're using are what we're looking for. How do we verify that each thing was performed correctly? So when we report back, if it passed, partially passed, or failed, and what the results of that would be the overall set of results. But then for each individual test within Meshery CTL, for example, which ones passed or which ones failed. we don't have to go off and build a whole, we're not necessarily trying to build a massive framework around all this necessarily. But we do need to enforce some consistency and ultimately bubble up some of these reports. And if we're using the same nomenclature in terms of what's passing, what's partially passing, what's failing, that'll really help. We can, yeah, and so then for each component, like building a Meshery adapter and testing it, like this particular file should just be referencing all of those other end-to-end tests, or all of those other build scripts that build those other components, and then bringing them into here for a set of different tests. Part of what I'm saying, I think, probably makes sense in general. Part of it doesn't. It really, we have to go write down what component, what workflow is accomplishing what task and when, and why there are multiple different workflows needed. Sure, some of it's maintainability of like one workflow for a specific purpose. Sure. Also, because there's a workflow for a specific purpose, it can be reused. So it's like when someone submits a PR, it gets used. When the PR merges, potentially it gets used. When a release happens, potentially it gets used. Every night for full regression, potentially it gets used. Some of the service mesh, the GitHub actions, potentially they get reused through here as well, but they would be even a smaller subcomponent of some of the other tests. So really there's a ton of reuse that can go on, a lot of fairly intelligent series of interactions, and it's like one repo calling the next, the other one calling that one, and like and them potentially running in parallel and doing. So there's and that's not us necessarily building out a massive our own framework as much as it's just it kind of becomes that as much as us just using GitHub workflows very well. And I think this particular thing is helpful and offers some coverage. The Meshery CTL smoke tests that you're creating like offer some coverage. Right now, those are entirely duplicative of the Golang unit tests and integration tests that we're running for Meshery CTL. But I understand that workflow probably sets us up for additional set of tests. And so this is good. Like I think the notion that, hey, there isn't right now in the spreadsheet, there isn't, that spreadsheet is manually updated, and that's fine. It's not meant to be a status of like what's passing and failing. It's meant to be a status of what's covered. That's kind of where you're taking it. And actually what you're doing is a natural evolution from where we started. When we first started the spreadsheet, it was like, oh, let's list out a bunch of just, tests, and then let's make sure that they have OS coverage. And then let's make sure they have different, Docker versus different platform coverage. And then let's make sure we have different component coverage. And then let's work toward automation and stuff. And so we're toward that automation. The things that you'd said about like testing from both ends, from Meshery UI as a client, Meshery CTL as a client. The nice thing about hitting those two clients is that, and from a functional perspective, from an end-to-end perspective, is that they flex. We don't necessarily, they flex Meshery server and they flex the adapters as well. They also inherently flex the REST APIs and the GraphQL APIs to the extent that we have tests that assert certain responses for certain things. So it's a really, it is a juicy thing to spend time doing. And there's so much success to be had, because this isn't like when we were looking at testing adapters previously, it was like, oh, one of the maintainers wanted to use BATS, this bash automation testing something framework, something system, I don't know. Good, but we're basically have displaced that with GitHub Actions. We've displaced it with unit tests and integration tests. And what we've described here is so achievable. It's like actually we're very well set up to get a massive collection of test coverage fairly quickly based on all the work that's been done in workflows today. So, and this will be ongoing focus for us. Like we ultimately really we'll be looking at these reports and we should be able to catch things pretty easy. Like what Nivendu is showing is that, hey, when Kubernetes 1.24 comes out and they change maybe the API version from V1 beta 1 of a certain API to V1, like what we had experienced with the deprecation of custom resource of CRD spec, like we can test that in advance of doing a release. The output from here too is very helpful in terms of what passed and what failed under these different platforms. So we're really set up, very well. Like there's been a lot of the groundwork has been done to be able to come over with overarching set of tests. But we do need to rationalize like what's happening at the different strata of tests between, and I don't mean pedantically, like what's a unit test, what's an integration test, but I mean like, what frameworks are we using at various levels and what the value is of those. And when they run, how frequently, how do we centralize as much of that output as we can? How much of that is just going to be thrown away based on the history of what gets tracked in GitHub, which is actually really important when you do see a high level red mark and a failing test case. It's like, if you're going to fix it, you do need to be able to drill into the detail to get down to where it first started failing and what the output was. So if someone were to go, and I'm only saying this just for fun, we shouldn't account for this now, but it's like CodeCov is one of the tools that we're using to verify how much coverage we have on a per line basis. Well, it has output and statistics about what's going on. Those can be left aside for now from this focus. Cypress and the tests that run have the output as well. Like, well, so Mario, as you look at those, it's not necessarily the case that we don't necessarily have to do a lot with integrating with Cypress itself as much as just I mean, in terms of like going over, talking to its API, getting the test results, we just, in the workflow itself, we should be able to grab the results and then include those results in a report. I talked for a long time. Nivendu, did I leave you confused, like as to what would be appropriate to do next?
Yeah. So like, to be clear, like the scope of these end-to-end tests would be to test Meshery in its entirety, and it would actually work with all the edge releases of all the components. So Meshery operator, we build the Meshery operator, we build the adapters, we build the Meshery server and all that, and then try to test it, right? Like instead of just doing the CLI and then like testing from a user's perspective, we test.
But both are valid and both have their place. Something that gives us hope to being able to achieve either or is that we have workflows. We have workflows today generally for either or. Like the GitHub Actions are generally focused toward user-centric style testing of published artifacts, published releases, whereas a lot of the workflows that we have in the repos today are about building something actively and testing that. And they're both helpful because if you do a full regression test, you may not, sometimes you're going to want to build things actively. And other times you just want to say, no, look, like the thing that I'm trying to test is just, there's a new Kubernetes version. I just want to make sure that what we've released to date works with that. So don't build anything, but so it's both.
Yep. Got it. Yeah. So essentially we would be you'll be having multiple tests for, let's say, all the components, and we bring together all of those under one test, and then it's like plug and play, right? Like,
yeah, then hopefully, yeah, if we're using kind of common vernacular in our tests and their results, that it kind of becomes plug and play like that. Yeah, if we're reusing these workflows, and amalgamating them into higher level, like full regression tests, then yeah, then it is kind of plug and play in that regard. For some of you, you've seen this, but like to tie this concept together, it's an early but forthcoming compatibility matrix and sort of test status. And over time, this will mature quite a bit and become, well, probably quite the resource. And we'll probably have Slack notifications and other things going on. But there's been part of the way that this has taken shape is that if you think about, so Nivendu was describing an overarching end-to-end test for like fully regressing, things, and that's good. And the output of that, if that's running like every night, like, hey, wouldn't the output of that be nice to see here? Like, is the tip of every branch still good under some certain scenario? That's one question that people have. Another thing is like, hey, if we have ongoing, there's like across layer 5, there's like 70 something repos. There's a lot going on. And just across Meshery, there's like 30 something repos. And so where do you go to say, is Linkerd still working? And they just had a new release. Does Meshery work with that new release? It's like, well, in the Meshery Linkerd repo, it's running tests, fairly frequently. And if we and right now, the output of those tests, as of like a week ago, the output of those end-to-end tests is being persisted to Meshery docs. And then we're just, in a very, very, very simple way today, just showing the output of those most recent tests. So for Open Service Mesh, for the Meshery adapter for Open Service Mesh, it ran a few tests here recently. They passed. What were the tests like that? This was the version of OSM. If you click on the row, it will expose just a very nominal set of info today. And which says, well, what platform was it done on? And what were the end-to-end tests that were run? And right now this is simple lifecycle management tests of saying, can the Meshery OSM adapter deploy these OSM components? And did they like the assertion that's being done here is, did they achieve a running state? If so, then this particular test passed. That's what Ashish Tiwari had determined. So those tests can be refined over time. We can change the criteria. We could add additional tests other than lifecycle management ones. We can add additional platforms and stuff. Like the report format here needs to be enhanced, and we need to be able to slice this in different ways. But you can imagine then that, okay, fine, this is test status. Like at some point, there's a compatibility matrix that can be fairly easily built from the same data that says, so great, so Meshery V060 is compatible with these Kubernetes, this Docker, this. Yeah. Cool. Comments, like, are some of you, I hope some of you are saying like, hey, where can I add value? Like, how can I participate? Like what, right? That's what all of you are saying, right?
Lee, like, I think like maybe we can write this down, like on what tests we are going to write.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. Yes, exactly.
And get it reviewed.
Yeah. The style of test. It's not even like necessarily, are you going to test if Meshery CTL context switch works as a command or as just a random example? It's much more than that at a high level. It's like, when do you test the built version of Meshery CTL? When do you test the currently,
So we
That-
want smoke testing,
yeah,
and then look for compatibility, like reporting, share that.
and to layer the tests on one another such that if there's a basic smoke test that happens, which is in some respects, that's kind of what we were just looking at here, is like, this is a really simple, like, did it like stand up and then, okay, great. Okay, well, from here, that same workflow can be built upon you could add to that workflow applying a service mesh pattern. And the pattern might be quite sophisticated with a bunch of other. But yeah, and so outside of writing down all the specific test cases, basically we need a long list of what Meshery's functionality is, and then verifying whether or not we've got coverage for those. But outside of that, yeah, we need to write down the strategy that says that there's a strata of different style tests, smoke tests, and that some of those just run like, all the time. And we should be working toward not being, disallowing ourselves from being able to merge a PR without that, or like really strongly discouraging ourselves from ever doing that kind of a thing, only in, under duress. So in the meantime, so this is the challenge. This is actually where I get myself in trouble sometimes. It's like, okay, great. So if you walk away from the meeting right now, what you understand is, all right, so as a contributor, as a community member, what you should do? Nothing. It's like, no. You like nothing. Just wait for the design spec to come out that explains all this. No, like we're not gonna, any of you that want to sign up to write down the strategy, do like go. There's a document right now. It's in the drive. Start. We will seek out those that we will hold to the fire and make sure that they do write it, or like one person at least to write it, and then everyone else can review. But in the meantime, it's very clear that this is a beneficial test. This test is only running against Open Service Mesh, Kuma, Linkerd, Istio. That's like 4 meshes, and we support 10 and soon 11. So for any of you that are on the call, you can go help propagate the particular test here. So I'm just using the Istio adapter as an example. Right now, there are 2 workflows that need to be consolidated into one. You can begin to familiarize. You can try to take one of these workflows and bring it over to the Nginx SM, any of the other adapters. To orient you very quickly, it's just this runs when someone opens a pull request or when a pull request gets merged. What it does is it checks out the adapter code and builds it. Then, and then it applies a pattern file, a simple pattern file that just says, that just tells the adapter to deploy that particular service mesh. And these are the way that Ashish Tiwari has done this, is he's basically written down assertions here, which is actually, for the first time I'm seeing this. So he's saying like that the test will pass, I guess, if you see these pods and they're in the, I'm assuming the running state. But it does its thing. It collects I haven't read this before actually. So, but basically he takes the output and formats it into a markdown file, and then pushes from the Meshery Istio adapter repo, he pushes that markdown file and the test results over to the main Meshery repo where the docs are. So this robot account, he uses the service account to do that. And then, so actually in this way, Meshery becomes self-documenting, right? Like every time that this is run, like all the time, it's like now self-committing, updating those tests. And guess what? So Jared Byers from F5 from Nginx, he's been asking around some of this recently, and what a beautiful thing for him to do. It's very encouraging that he's, you know, that Mario in specific and Jared are both here. Like actually, they're both at F5. I don't know. So F5 produces some good engineers apparently, and so, or good engineers join F5. I don't know which is, but. Jared said, hey, how many versions of each service mesh should Meshery be compatible with? You know, 1, 2, 4, like, and the response was like, well, like 20, 30, 50, like a lot of, most of them up to a certain point, but like a lot. And you know, you couldn't see his eyes on the call, but his eyes probably popped out of his, you know, he probably like rolled his eyes saying, yeah, well, good luck with that. Right. And like, if I were him, that's what I would be saying. Is like, the thing is we can flip that on its head. Like if you get this right, you can get really close to being pretty, or you can get all the way to being really confident that yes, in fact, all those versions work. It's a massive matrix. If you really get into it in detail, we talked about this yesterday, all the possible permutations. So if you're on the call, it's a good time to be on this call. This is a real need. And there's various areas to jumping into Cypress, jumping into GitHub workflows, jumping into unit testing in Golang, integration testing in Golang. So, jumping into Meshery docs, into Jekyll, like how is this working and how can we make sure that report works better? What else do we have today? Oh, Mario, should we circle back to you real quick before we, are you?
It's working.
Thumbs up. All right.
Yeah,
you know?
super easy. Should have done this
all came down
before.
All came down
Thanks
to a
lot.
checkbox. Yeah.
Yeah, I even added some steps. Hopefully that helps someone else. Maybe that could be turned into some blog, you know, to have handy. The difference here a bit versus the one we have is that the other one just helped anyone build up server and UI locally, and that was it. But this is basically helping us use the latest stable release of Meshery, and then you can just get the local UI running, and then this will help anyone get started with Cypress testing, at least have everything that they need, and actually doing any kind of deploy would, you know, it closely resembles like an end user's environment. So pretty cool.
Comments from others. So Prasad is with us today, and Prasad, have you gotten a chance to say hi on this call? Have you gotten a chance to get to know everybody? As you hunt for the mute button. So Prasad is with us, and Anshu was earlier, but I guess we lost him. And Sayantan and Vishal and Navindu and Mario and Aditya and Adina and the other Aditya. Although the Adityas will never know which one I referred to as the other Aditya. Prasad, you with us? You want to say hi real quick? You can do so in chat if you want to. It's just nice to get to know folks on the call. Mario, I'm encouraged that you're unleashed in some regard, like in some respects. So that's
yeah, I think I can script what's pending like easily. So I'll get this going. Shouldn't take much long.
Nice. All right. Well, we're top of the hour. Navendu, anything else we're missing?
Just a quick check, like, is the master test strategy doc a good place to write some of these down?
Yeah, it is. I think long term we might want to consolidate. Yes. Then when we're done, we'll see if maybe consolidating into the build and release doc it makes sense or not. But
Yep.
yeah,
Okay.
totally.
Maybe at least a link from the build and release over to this one, right?
Totally. Fair enough. All right. Well, we'll see some of you for tomorrow's year-end recap, I suppose. That and some eggnog. So, all right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario.
Great
Thanks all.
day.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.